Poland will never lose its national character. It is too sharply defined. Piotr Kropotkin. The relationship between Russia and Poland has always been complicated. For several centuries in a row, they fiercely fought for dominance in Eastern Europe, and they did so with varying degrees of success. In the early 17th century, Polish troops entered Moscow and almost put their candidate on the Russian throne. However, by the middle of that same century, the Moscow Tsardom managed to take the eastern Ukrainian lands from Poland, which in fact marked the beginning of the Russian Empire. The 18th century was a period of decline for Polish statehood, and it ended in a real catastrophe with the partitions of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, as a result of which the Poles lost their state for more than a century. Poland became part of the Russian Empire and was only able to regain its independence after the February Revolution. In this episode, I'll discuss how Poles lived under Russian Tsarist rule, what occurred in Polish lands then, and the extent of the invaders' oppression. And we will also look at how the Poles fought for their independence, talk about the famous Polish uprisings, and the later fate of the insurgents. I'm Semyon, opening the How Did They Live On section. Let's start. How did Poland lose its statehood? The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a noble republic where the king's power was very limited, though not just nominal. In the 18th century, the nobility reached the height of its power, which, however, did not benefit the Polish state. Noble factions, led by powerful magnates, not only influenced the domestic and foreign policy of their country, but also sought support from external players, which, of course, was a bad idea. At the Polish court, Austrian, German, and Russian factions emerged, aligning with Vienna, Berlin, and St. Petersburg. By mid-century, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had become a typical violent state. Foreigners not only determined its policy, but also decided who would sit on the Polish throne. For example, the last king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Stanisław August Poniatowski, a protege and favorite of Catherine II, received the throne only thanks to Russia's military intervention, and the vote for him took place almost at gunpoint by the troops of the Russian Empire. In 1768, the Warsaw Treaty was signed, making the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth a protectorate of the Russian Empire. In response, the Poles rose up in rebellion, which led to the entry of Russian troops into the territory of the Polish state. Thousands of rebels were sent to Siberia or the Orenburg steppes. In 1772, during the first partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Russia gained Vitebsk, Polotsk, the Divina Land, and Livonia. The second partition of Poland was formally justified by its new constitution, which St. Petersburg saw as Poland trying to leave the Russian sphere. Now all Belarusian lands up to Pinsk and Zbruch, eastern Polesia, and Ukraine's Volhynia and Podolia regions were transferred to Russia. The pretext for the third partition of Poland was the unsuccessful uprising of Kościusz. As a result, the Polish-Lithuanian state was finally abolished, and Russia received the lands that the Poles themselves called the 7 eastern provinces. These are now the territories of Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania. The Poles got a certain chance to restore their statehood during the Napoleonic Wars. According to the terms of the Treaty of Tilsit, the Duchy of Warsaw was created, a state under the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte. The Poles sympathized with him, hoping to restore their state within the borders of the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with the help of the French Emperor. Unfortunately, the French lost and Polish lands again fell under Russian control. The final decision on the Polish question was made at the Congress of Vienna in 1815. Much of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, including Warsaw, became part of the Russian Empire, under the name of the Kingdom of Poland, and Emperor Alexander also became the King of Poland. Thus began a new stage in Polish history, life under the shadow of the double-headed eagle. The Kingdom of Poland under Alexander I. The first thing the Russian Empire did after annexing the Kingdom of Poland. It abolished the Napoleonic Code, but in return, the Poles received a constitution, something people in Russia itself could only dream of. According to it, Poland became a hereditary monarchy, permanently joined with the Russian Empire. In the Kingdom of Poland, the role of the Sejm was preserved, and the Russian Tsar was formally considered the head of the executive power, but in reality the country was governed by his viceroy along with his council. The official language in the country remained. The inhabitants freely practiced Catholicism. In 1817, Polish peasants were released from many duties, and by 1820 corvée labor became a monetary tax. Poland also kept its own army, with many Napoleonic War veterans serving. It can be said that Alexander I was generally very loyal to Poland and really tried to integrate it into the Russian Empire. The emperor's motives are hard to explain. Perhaps he was trying to appeal to liberal Europe or to be known as a merciful ruler, or maybe he just wanted to see what it was like to be a constitutional monarch. But Russian society, and especially its elite, viewed the Poles with hostility, considering them dangerous troublemakers like Jacobins. Alexander III sought to include Lithuanian and Polish elites in government. Poles served in the Imperial Senate and some held key positions. For instance, Adam Czartoryski, a close friend of the emperor, was on the unofficial committee and served as Minister of Foreign Affairs. This phenomenon wasn't widespread, as the Polish nobility despised their new masters and saw themselves as culturally superior. It should be noted that the reign of Alexander III became a period of economic growth for the Kingdom of Poland. Significant progress was observed in trade, agriculture, and industry, and a huge imperial market opened up for Polish industrialists and merchants. There were enough taxes to pay the salaries of officials and the army on time. The country's population rose to 4.5 million. The early 19th century saw a flourishing of Polish culture, with artists Aleksander Orlowski, Józef Juleszkiewicz, and poet Adam Mickiewicz producing notable works. Chopin's rise was beginning, and new schools, universities, and art centers were opening nationwide. However, even such a privileged position within the Russian Empire did not satisfy the Poles. They wanted to restore the independence of their state, and there was no room for compromise on this issue. Almost immediately after the creation of the Kingdom of Poland, secret nationalist societies began to appear there, mostly consisting of students and military personnel. For example, the National Patriotic Society sought both Polish independence and a revolution within Russia. However, in 1822, all of its members were exposed and arrested. Tension in Polish society kept rising, and 5 years after Alexander I's death, in 1830, it erupted into a major uprising that drastically changed the situation of Poles in the Russian Empire. Poland under Nikolai I. Nikolai I, whose reign began with the uprising on Senate Square, was never a liberal, unlike his predecessor. The new emperor did not have warm feelings toward the Poles and immediately began tightening the screws. It was clear that nothing good could come of this. In 1830, another revolution took place in France, which inspired the Poles to take up arms once again. More than 150 Poles took part in the large-scale anti-racist uprising, a third of whom were killed. After its brutal suppression, a huge number of politically active Poles were exiled from the Kingdom of Poland to remote Russian provinces. The 1830 uprising also had very serious political consequences for Poland. Nikolai I believed that it was precisely the liberal flirtations with the Poles that led to the rebellion. He abolished the constitution, dissolved the Sejm, and disbanded the Polish army. The Kingdom of Poland lost its autonomy and now became an ordinary part of the Russian Empire. The changes even affected the currency. The local zloty was replaced by the Russian ruble. A policy of widespread Russification began in the Polish lands. Restrictions were imposed on the use of the Polish language, and Tsarist censorship banned the publication of literary works by Mickiewicz, Lelewel, and other Polish authors. The universities in Vilnius and Warsaw were closed, the Uniate Church was banned, the Catholic clergy came under strict supervision, and about 340,000 members of the minor Polish nobility lost their noble status. Nicholas I's attitude toward the Poles is clearly demonstrated by one incident. During his visit to Warsaw in 1835, he forbade local deputies from expressing their loyal sentiments to him so as to protect them from lying. At the same time, he said the following: "I need deeds, not words." If you persist in your dreams of national separation, of Polish independence and similar fantasies, you will bring the greatest misfortune upon yourselves. I'm telling you, at the slightest unrest, I will order the city to be fired upon, I will turn Warsaw into ruins, and of course, I will not rebuild it. Poland during the reign of Alexander II. Nikolai I was an open enemy of the Polish people and the Polish state, so the reign of Alexander II was met with great enthusiasm. At first, these hopes even seemed justified. The new emperor freed many political prisoners, allowed some immigrants to return, and permitted the publication of previously banned authors. The same Mickiewicz, who actively supported the underground movements of his homeland. Under Alexander II, new educational institutions were opened in Poland, which became important centers of intellectual life. However, for the Poles, this was not enough, so they launched an even fiercer uprising. Polish society in the late 1850s was influenced by the recent unification of Italy, the Austrian Revolution, and liberal reforms in Germany. The results of the Crimean War, which led to a significant weakening of the Russian Empire on the international stage, also greatly inspired the Poles. The uprising's organizers counted on the empire's weakness, the young Tsar's inexperience, and European aid. However, these expectations were unmet. The Russian Empire sent a large military force into Poland, and despite resistance, the insurgents were defeated. It ended with the execution of key participants and mass deportation of Poles to Siberia or penal servitude in Transbaikalia. However, the political consequences of the defeat were much more severe. Russia punished the Poles for the rebellion by stripping them of their remaining autonomy. Self-government bodies, state, and administrative councils were abolished, and all power was transferred to the Governor-General of Warsaw. Additionally, the Kingdom of Poland was abolished as an administrative entity, replaced by the Przywislęski Kraj on the former Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth lands. In response to the uprising, the Russian Empire enforced strict Russification policies. Under Alexander II, Russian was made the official language in Poland. It was used in the courts, in schools and universities, shops and theaters also became Russian, and even speaking Polish in public places was fined. Russian criminal law was enforced in Poland, censorship was rampant, persecution of the Catholic and especially the Uniate Church intensified, and many Catholic monasteries and churches were closed or handed over to the Orthodox Church. Russian officials flocked to Poland in large numbers, lured into service by benefits, higher salaries and pensions. This approach attracted people of questionable character, so very soon for the Poles, a Russian official became synonymous with a bribe taker. It's not surprising that anti-government sentiments quickly gained popularity in Polish society, which modern historians from Russia call Russophobia. Even repression could not break the proud Polish spirit. In 1866, strong Poles started an uprising in Transbaikalia, where they had been exiled after the revolutionary events in their homeland. Just imagine, people who had gone through arrest, investigation, and transportation being thousands of kilometers from their homeland, still found the strength to fight against their oppressors. It was then that the famous slogan, "For our freedom and yours," was born. Poland under Alexander III and Nicholas II. Despite the brutal suppression of the Polish uprising, Alexander II was considered a liberal. And it must be said, there were reasons for that. He abolished serfdom in Russia and implemented several other progressive reforms. However, after his assassination, Alexander III ascended the throne, and it would be hard to call him a liberal, even if you wanted to. His attitude toward the Polish question was extremely harsh, especially since one of his father's assassins was Polish. Russification of Poland was not only continued but intensified under Alexander III's reign. The Polish language was removed from school curricula, and street names and store signs were written only in Russian. The Catholic Church was forbidden to build new churches or restore old ones without special permission, and seminaries were severely restricted in admitting students. However, at the same time, attitudes toward Poles in Russia itself began to change, especially among Russian intellectuals. Many considered the partitions of Poland unjust and sympathized with the proud people deprived of statehood. They said turning Poles into Russians was impossible, so it was better to let them live their own way. Pyotr Kropotkin, the renowned anarchist and scholar, argued Russia would benefit more from having Poland as a friendly neighbor than as a hostile, subjugated nation. Poles stopped staging uprisings and instead began forming large underground socialist groups like Russia's Narodnaya Volia. They took an active part in the All-Russian revolutionary movement. For example, a member of the Polish Socialist Party was the young Józef Pilsudski, the future founder of the reborn Polish state. Poles enthusiastically welcomed and actively participated in the First Russian Revolution of 1905. Mass demonstrations took place all over Poland, often leading to armed clashes with the troops. Polish revolutionaries launched a real hunt for government officials. In 1905-1906, they killed nearly 800 Tsarist officials. After the First Russian Revolution, the State Duma began operating with Polish deputies among its members. There they formed the Polish Kolo, the Polish Circle, an association that advocated for the right of the Polish people to separate from Russia along with their ancestral territories. The end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century was a period of flourishing Polish culture. During this time, the future Nobel laureate Władysław Remont was creating and writing his best works. Sienkiewicz, they played an important role in shaping national identity in the visual arts. The theme of the national liberation struggle is reflected in the works of Gierymski, Granger, Matejko, and Malczewski, as well as in the renaissance of the Polish state. World War I caused Poles under Russian rule to fight other Poles serving in the German and Austro-Hungarian armies. The most active military operations on Polish lands took place in the second half of 1914, but by 1915 the former Kingdom of Poland was already completely under German and Austrian occupation. In 1917, the Russian Provisional Government recognized the Polish people's right to independence. On August 29, 1918, the Soviet government annulled the agreement on the partition of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and already on October 6, 1918, the Regency Council of Poland declared the restoration of Polish statehood. So for the Polish people, this marked the end of one of the most difficult periods in their history, associated with the loss of their own country. However, the Polish people's hardships were only beginning. Ahead of them awaited a war with Bolshevik Russia, the heroic defense of Warsaw, yet another partition of Poland, this time between Stalin and Hitler, Katyn, the brutal German occupation, and nearly half a century as a satellite of the Soviet Empire. Polish people could live normally and peacefully only after the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics collapsed and Poland joined NATO and the European Union. But that's a completely different story. Goodbye, everyone.